Hi, everyone, and welcome to Crisis Communications. Before we jump into the content, I want to take a moment to frame what this course is really about and why I'm excited to teach it. This course is not about memorizing definitions or learning how to write the perfect statement. Crisis communication doesn't happen in calm, controlled environments. It happens when information is incomplete, emotions are high, and decisions need to be made quickly. Crisis communication doesn't happen in calm classrooms, so this course won't pretend it does. You won't memorize scripts or formulas. You'll practice making decisions when things are unclear. You'll analyze real cases where communication choices had real consequences. You'll learn how small decisions can escalate or calm a crisis. This course is about learning how to think clearly when things are messy. I'm teaching this course because I've spent much of my career working with leaders and organizations during moments when things were not going as planned. I've seen firsthand how communication choices, sometimes just a few words, can either calm a situation or make it significantly worse. You don't need prior experience in public relations or communications to succeed in this class. What you need is curiosity, critical thinking, and a willingness to sit with uncertainty. That's what we'll practice together. Outside of being Professor V, I am the Global Executive Vice President of Learning and Development at Edelman, the largest global communications, public relations, and integrated communications consultancy in the world. I have been in the corporate and agency space for almost 25 years. Professionally, I work as a global executive leader focused on communication, leadership, and learning. Much of my work involves supporting organizations when things are uncertain, during reputational challenges, leadership transitions, or moments when communication choices really matter. I've seen how small decisions, especially around messaging and timing, can either build trust or cause long-term damage. Everything we'll talk about in this class connects back to real situations I've worked through with leaders and teams. Rider is also home for me. I'm a proud Rider and ZTA alumna, and teaching here is something I care deeply about. I've returned to Rider as an adjunct professor because I believe strongly in preparing students not just for their first job, but for the real challenges they'll face throughout their careers. I also teach business in action and business communications at the Norm Brodsky School of Business. Let's start with a fundamental question. What is a crisis? According to our textbook, a crisis is an unexpected event that disrupts normal operations and threatens an organization's reputation, credibility, or survival. What's important here is that a crisis isn't defined by how dramatic it looks, it's defined by impact. Something relatively small can become a crisis if it threatens trust or escalates publicly. At the same time, something very serious doesn't always become a crisis if it's handled well. This is where many organizations get it wrong. They assume that if the problem seems manageable internally, it won't be perceived as a crisis externally. But perception matters just as much as reality. One of the most important distinctions we'll make early in this course is the difference between a problem, an issue, and a crisis. A problem is something routine. It's annoying, but it's manageable. Organizations deal with problems every day. A system glitch, a late delivery, a scheduling conflict. Problems don't usually threaten trust on their own. An issue is something that develops over time. It's a concern that keeps coming up and hasn't been fully addressed. Issues are dangerous because they often feel familiar or manageable, which makes them easy to ignore. Many crises begin as issues that were allowed to linger. A crisis is different. A crisis threatens an organization's reputation, credibility, or ability to function. At this point, trust is at risk, emotions are high, and time pressure increases. One of the most common mistakes organizations make is treating a crisis like a problem. They minimize it, delay communication, or assume it will resolve itself. By the time they recognize that the situation is a crisis, public trust has often already been damaged. As we move through this course, you'll start to identify where situations cross the line and how earlier communication choices could have prevented escalation. Crisis management and crisis communication are often used interchangeably, but they're actually very different, and confusing the two is one of the biggest mistakes organizations make. Crisis management is about action. It's the operational side of a crisis, fixing the system, stopping the problem, making decisions, and putting processes in place. This is what leaders and teams are doing behind the scenes. Crisis communication, on the other hand, is about meaning. It's about how people outside and inside the organization understand what's happening. It's about perception, trust, and credibility. Here's the key idea. An organization can manage a crisis well operationally and still fail publicly if communication breaks down. If people don't understand what's happening, don't trust the message, or feel ignored, the crisis can continue even after the problem is technically fixed. This is why crisis communication matters so much. It shapes how people interpret actions, how they assign responsibility, and whether trust can be rebuilt. In this course, we'll focus heavily on communication because it's often the difference between recovery and long-term damage. As you move through this course, I want you to start noticing how often crises, these early warning signs, have a name: prodromes. A prodrome is an early indication that a crisis may be developing. Prodromes can include customer complaints, employee concerns, repeated system failures, leaks, or even jokes and rumors that point to deeper issues. Prodromes don't cause crises. Ignoring prodromes does. Organizations often dismiss these signs because addressing them feels uncomfortable, expensive, or inconvenient. But Chapter 1 makes it clear that the cost of ignoring prodromes is almost always higher in the long run. As you move through this course, I want you to start noticing how often crises, these early warning signs, have a name: prodromes. A prodrome is an early indication that a crisis may be developing. Prodromes can include customer complaints, employee concerns, repeated system failures, leaks, or even jokes and rumors that point to deeper issues. Prodromes don't cause crises. Ignoring prodromes does. Organizations often dismiss these signs because addressing them feels uncomfortable, expensive, or inconvenient. But Chapter 1 makes it clear that the cost of ignoring prodromes is almost always higher in the long run. Chapter 1 also introduces the 5 stages of a crisis: detection, preparation, containment, recovery, and learning. Detection and preparation happen before a crisis becomes public. This is where prodromes matter most. Containment and recovery happen during and after the crisis, when organizations are under the most pressure. The final stage, learning, is where organizations reflect on what happened and make changes to prevent it from happening again. Unfortunately, this stage is often rushed or skipped entirely, which is why similar crises repeat over time. A key takeaway here is that the earliest stages are where crises are most preventable. Another foundational concept in crisis communication is the idea of publics. Organizations don't communicate with the public, they communicate with different publics. Employees, customers, students, communities, and media outlets all have different concerns and expectations during a crisis. Effective crisis communication requires understanding who is affected, what they care about, and how communication choices will land with them. One message does not fit everyone. As we move forward, you'll practice identifying which publics matter most in different crisis scenarios. One of the hardest lessons in crisis communication is that silence is never neutral. When organizations say nothing, people fill in the gaps themselves, often with speculation, assumptions, or misinformation. Silence can feel safer in the moment, but it often increases confusion and damages trust. Choosing not to communicate is still a communication choice, and it sends a message whether organizations intend it to or not.